Where's the history behind it? How come you have hundreds of thousands of people pushed into small part of the land? How can you explain the situation in Gaza, the Israeli atrocities, the Israeli war crimes in Gaza, the killing of 1,400 people in recent atrocities, without going back to history, without looking in 1948, and the way people were expelled in 1948. So for a historian like me, I can't explain the West Bank and Gaza without looking at the history and the way people were driven out by force through atrocities and massacres, through rape. Now, we historians, when we look at 1948 and we interview refugees and we talk to women, we discover a lot of things from talking to women in Jordan. I mean, I have PhD students actually doing research, interviewing women. I discovered a lot of things from Israeli archives about 1948, but also I discovered a lot of things from talking to men and women in refugee camps. Simply ordinary people, not intellectuals, not people who are professors and Edward Said, but ordinary people tell you stories about 1948. And they tell us there was a lot of rape in 1948. This is something which I didn't know, rape, really mass rape. Now the idea of rape in a situation of war is not unique to the Palestinians. By the way, we saw it in Bosnia. A lot of Muslim women were raped in Srebrenica and before the massacres, the famous massacres, thousands of women got pregnant. We know that. The Catholic Church wanted to adopt them. Rape in Palestine was a big thing in 1948, more than 1967. Now, rape as a tool of war was also here in Berlin. We know women were raped in Berlin when the Russian army came to Berlin. We know Nazi soldiers raped women in occupied places in Europe. But rape as a tool of ethnic cleansing, as a tool of frightening people. Arab society is a society of shame. Honor and shame and respect and sex is something very sensitive to Arab society. The fear of rape, it was a factor. Now we discover it as historians. We look at why people left this religion, this town and that town. Is it the massacre of the scene? Is it other massacres? Now we discovered all sorts of things about 1940, which I, as a second generation, third generation, as a young man born in 1957, didn't know about it. And this is something we Palestinian historians now know about it. So when we talk about how is it that Israel can actually kill 1,400 Palestinians and get away with it? Really, the Israelis are getting away with it. 11 Israelis died, 13 Israelis died in that war. How many Israelis died? 13? Some are soldiers, some are 18. Really, the Israelis said, if you kill one Israeli, we will kill 100 Palestinians. Does it sound familiar? That's what actually the Nazis, in Amsterdam, the Nazi officer says, if you kill a German officer, we'll kill 100 Belgian. Is it different? In what way it's different? In what way? The Nazis thought that, German blood is more precious than any other blood on earth. The Israelis think the same way. Jewish blood is more precious than any Palestinian blood. Almost a third of those killed, 1,400, were children. 40% were women and children. 85% were civilians. Civilians really nothing to do with Hamas. Some were policemen, but were not Hamas, just policemen. And they're getting away with it. You can't explain why the Israelis get away with it without looking at 1948 and the fact that they drove hundreds of thousands. Now the number is 5 to 6 million, and they are getting away. Israelis got away with murder in 1940. They are getting away with murder now. The issue was discussed by the United Nations Human Rights Council recently, and we know the vote. We know the Gold Star report, but this is wishy-washy. I think they will get away with it because the Human Rights Councils, if they were referred to the Security Council, it will be blocked by Barack Obama. Have no illusions about it. Barack Obama will make sure that the Security Council will not take this resolution and make sure that this resolution will not go to the Hague, International Criminal Court in The Hague. Barack Obama will make sure that Ehud Barak, who was defense minister, who was the prime minister, and, Ehud Olmert and Ehud Barak, who was defense minister, will not be tried in The Hague in the same way Slobodan Milosevic and Radovan Karadzic now being tried in The Hague. Karadzic, the guy who was hiding in Bosnia. Okay, so you can have a Serb, you can pick up a Serb, NATO can actually arrest a leading Serb, put on trial. They will not do it here in Germany. Ehud Olmert and Ehud Barak, if they turn up in Germany, I can assure you the German government will make sure no German court will try him for war crimes. And if he were to come to London, he will not be tried for. Now, is it just 1948? Is it just the catastrophe of 1940? Is it just the question of the refugees? No, it's not just the question of the refugees in 1948. You have Deputy Prime Minister in the Israeli government, Avigdor Lieberman, an immigrant. He came recently to Israel, 20 years ago, and he's actually threatening the Palestinians with another Nakba. You can see the Nakba, the Holocaust, the Palestinian Holocaust, I want to use the word Holocaust. It's not just about 1948. It could happen now. The threat, you have an Israeli minister threatening the Palestinians in the Galilee with another catastrophe. The Israelis are pushing Palestinians from East Jerusalem to the east of the wall. Slowly, gradually, you have a creeping transfer, creeping ethnic cleansing. So the question of the Palestinian catastrophe in 1940 is actually on the mind of the Israelis. It's on the mind of the Palestinians. The fear, the trauma. It's not just about the past. The Holocaust, the Jewish Holocaust is about the past. The Jewish Holocaust is in the past. The Palestinian catastrophe is in the present. It's now. It's happening in Gaza. The Israeli policies, the number of Palestinians being killed recently, it's not reported here in the West. A large number being killed on the West Bank, by the way, not just in Gaza. It's happening now. The killing, the large number of killing is going on and on and on, and they are getting away with it. And they will be protected by Barack Obama. Getting away with war crimes. Now, so talking about the peace process, it just didn't work. And the reason why it didn't work, because it was actually built on fraud. It was built on deception, it was built on denial. The Israelis deny any responsibility for the Palestinian catastrophe, deny any Palestinian right of return, no compensation to the Palestinians, no refugees back, no acknowledgement of suffering. Millions of people suffered, no acknowledgement. Can you imagine the German government denying their German Holocaust? Can you imagine that? The Israelis deny any wrongdoing. We haven't done anything wrong. We did nothing wrong. 100 years ago, there was a country which is populated 95% of it. There were few Jews actually in that country 100 years ago. And now the Palestinians are being reduced to a minority in their own land, in their own country. Where do you have a situation equivalent like that? The reason why the peace process doesn't work is actually built on fraud. It's really built on fraud. It's built on this idea there's a kind of parity between Israel and Palestine. There is no parity. There's one power, a colonial power, colonizing the other side. It's not just occupation. 10, 20 years ago, we used to talk about occupation. What is occupation? Occupation, you have an occupying army, and you can shift this army. This army can move from one side to another side. If it was just occupation, then the army can withdraw. It's not just occupation, it's colonization. The Israeli settlements, ongoing, continuing, despite the peace process, during the peace process, under the peace process, under the cover of the peace process, the Israelis are day by day building more and more colonization. That's why Israel that's why Israel is not presented properly here in the West. The West talk about Israel-Palestine or Israel and the Palestinians, kind of equivalent, parity, symmetry. There's no symmetry at all. People in Europe, the media in Europe talks about post-colonial situation. There's no post-colonial in Palestine. Palestine is colonial, still colonial. In the 21st century, they're still colonizing the country. It's the only country on earth which is really colonizing now, openly, with the support of the Americans. Unless we present Palestine properly, unless we use the right language, unless we use the right discourse, we're not going to make much progress. And I think this is something for us here living in the West. I mean, I live in the West, kind of voluntary exile in the West. I go to Palestine, I go to Israel once a year. But I think our main job here is actually to present the reality on the ground, which is a colonial situation. Colonial with apartheid, i.e. a racist, colonial, white colony, white settlements, which is expanding. Unless you explain it to people properly in the West, they're not going to understand it. They will continue to think, if you continue to play the German media and the British media, you tend to think about Israel as a kind of normal democratic country. It's got elections and it's got parliaments and it's got Labour coming, sort of Likud. It's just presented as a kind of normal democratic society. Of course, if you look at the reality, it's a racist state. Racist state, really. What I mean by racist, it means that a Palestinian in the Galilee cannot marry a Palestinian from the West Bank. Have you heard about it? Legally, the law in Israel says, if you are a Palestinian from Nazareth, you can't go and have a wife from Ramallah or vice versa. You can't. You can't bring it here. Why do you have a situation like that in Europe? Is this not racism of the kind of things we have in the 20s and 30s here in Europe, in this country? What does it mean if you are a native of Jerusalem and you live and you live in Ramallah, you can't come back to Jerusalem? Is this not racism? What does it mean a Russian settler is coming yesterday and have automatic rights to live anywhere, and a Palestinian born in the country, born in his homeland, is allowed to live just in a small part of the country? Is this not racism? Crude racism, state racism, legal racism. Look at the laws. 92% of the land are reserved for Jews within the Green Lines. This is not racism. Done in the name of Judaism, by the way. It could be done in the name of Hinduism or someone else, actually. It's not about Judaism, it's about a racist colonial ideology, which I call Zionism, which people are not discussing it, they're not presenting it. They're not actually presenting really what Gaza means. What does it mean to concentrate 1.5 million Palestinians in a small part of the country and lock them up and have the keys with you? On one side you've got the Israelis with the keys, on the other side you've got the Egyptians with the keys. People are locked up in prison, 1.5 million in prison. It's a large concentration camp. Why the reality on the ground is not presented? Where is the media? Where is the facts? Where is the truth? Why is it that there is no truth? Nobody's actually telling you the truth about the realities. Where is the history behind it? How come you have hundreds of thousands of people pushed into small part of the land? How can you explain the situation in Gaza, the Israeli atrocities, the Israeli war crimes in Gaza, the killing of 1,400 people in recent atrocity, without going back to history, without looking at 1948 and the way people were expelled in 1948? So for a historian like me, I can't explain the West Bank and women in refugee camps. Simply ordinary people, not intellectuals, not people who are professors and Edward Said, but ordinary people tell you stories about 1948. And they tell us there was a lot of rape in 1948. This is something which I didn't know, rape, really mass rape. Now the idea of rape in a situation of war is not unique to the Palestinians. By the way, we saw it in Bosnia. A lot of Muslim women were raped in Srebrenica and before the massacres. Society is a society of shame. Honor and shame and respect and sex is something very sensitive to our society. The fear of rape It was a factor. Now we discover it as historians. We look at why people left this religion, this town and that town. Is it the massacre of the scene? Is it other massacres? Now we discovered all sorts of things about 1940, which I, as a second generation, third generation, as a young man born in 1957, didn't know about it. And the famous massacres of thousands of women got pregnant. We know that. The Catholic Church wanted to adopt them. Rape in Palestine was a big thing in 1948, more than 1967. Now, rape as a tool of war was also here in Berlin. We know women were raped in Berlin when the Russian army came to Berlin. We know Nazi soldiers raped women in occupied places in Europe. But rape as a tool of ethnic cleansing, as a tool of frightening people. Arabs in Gaza, without looking at the history and the way people were driven out by force through atrocities and massacres, through rape. Now, we historians, when we look at 1948 and we interview refugees and we talk to women, we discover a lot of things from talking to women in Jordan. I mean, I have PhD students actually doing research, interviewing women. I discovered a lot of things from Israeli archives about 1948, but also I discovered a lot of things from talking to men.